My name is Hannah Lee, and for most of my life, I have been a ghost in my own family portrait. While my parents proudly displayed the gleaming image of my brother, David, the heir to our family's successful import-export business, I was the undefined shape in the background, a source of quiet confusion and disappointment. Tonight, the portrait was being unveiled for all to see. We were gathered in the private banquet hall of the city's most exclusive restaurant, a room of dark wood, red silk, and whispering waiters. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and simmering ambition. This entire elaborate affair was in honor of David's promotion to Vice President of Lee International Trading. It was his coronation, and I was a mandatory, if slightly embarrassing, courtier. I sat at the long, polished table, a silent observer in a simple navy dress, a stark contrast to the glittering jewels and designer labels surrounding me. I watched my father, Wei Li, hold court. He was a man carved from ambition, a patriarch who believed success could be measured in bank statements and social standing. My mother, Mei Ling, glided between guests, her smile a carefully maintained work of art, her primary concern the preservation of face. And David, my brother, soaked in the adoration like a plant turning toward the sun, his laughter a little too loud, his gestures a little too broad. He was the son who had followed the path, who had done everything right. I was the daughter who had inexplicably, stubbornly, gone her own way. As my father raised his glass to begin the endless series of toasts, I braced myself. I knew that in his narrative of our family's success, I would be the cautionary tale, the footnote of failure. The humiliation was as predictable as the courses of the meal, and I had learned long ago to endure it with the same quiet discipline I applied to every other aspect of my life. They saw a quiet, unremarkable woman in a government job they didn't understand. They had no concept of my world, a world of classified briefings, of strategic analysis, of decisions that carried a weight they could not possibly imagine. They saw a failure. They were about to receive a correction. My path had diverged from theirs over a decade ago. The letter of acceptance to the United States Naval Academy had arrived on the same day David's acceptance to Wharton came. In my father's eyes, it was not a competition, it was a cosmic joke. He had envisioned two children bolstering the family dynasty, one through business, the other through a prestigious marriage after an Ivy League education. David had fulfilled his role perfectly. I had shattered the mold. I still remembered the shouting match in my father's study, a room that smelled of leather and disappointment. "The military," he had roared, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. "No daughter of mine will be a common soldier. You will bring shame on this family." My mother had wept, not for my safety, but for the social standing she believed would be lost. "What will I tell my friends, Hannah? That my daughter plays with guns instead of planning a wedding?" David had simply smirked, enjoying the show, his own success now shining even brighter in contrast to my scandalous rebellion. Their reaction hadn't been born of concern for my well-being, but of a deep-seated fear of the unknown. My chosen world was one they couldn't control, couldn't leverage for social gain. It was a world of service, not status, of duty, not dividends. It was, to them, utterly alien and therefore worthless. Through the years of grueling training, of deployments to places they had only seen on the news, of rising through the ranks on merit alone, I had become a stranger to them. My infrequent visits home were tense, awkward affairs. They would ask no questions about my work, and I would offer no details. It was a silent, mutual pact of ignorance. They would introduce me to their friends with a vague, dismissive wave. "This is Hannah. She works for the government in Washington." It was easier than trying to explain a life they refused to respect. Now, sitting at this banquet, I was once again the odd one out, the puzzle piece that didn't fit. My aunt, seeing me sitting quietly, leaned over. "Hannah, dear," she said, her voice dripping with pity. "Still with that government job. David is doing so well. Your parents must be so proud. You know, it's not too late to find a nice young man and settle down." I gave her a small, polite smile. "I'm very happy with my career, Auntie," I said, my voice even. It was a sentence I had repeated so many times it had lost all meaning. It was a shield, a polite wall to hide the truth, that I had given up trying to make them understand a long, long time ago. The dinner progressed, a slow, multi-course parade of my brother's achievements. Business associates of my father stood up to offer fawning toasts to David's brilliant business mind and his bright future at TH. Helm of the company. With each speech, my father's chest seemed to swell with pride, while my mother's smile grew wider, more radiant. I ate my food, my expression neutral, a master of emotional camouflage. I listened as they recounted David's successes, a lucrative deal he had supposedly spearheaded in Shanghai, a cost-saving measure he had implemented. I knew the truth behind these stories. The Shanghai deal had been secured by my father's connections, and the cost-saving measure was a simple software upgrade recommended by their IT department. But in the Lee family, perception was reality, and the reality tonight was that David was a titan of industry. A cousin I hadn't seen in years slid into the empty seat beside me. "Hannah, wow, it's been forever. So what is it you do exactly? Dad said you were some kind of secretary in D.C." Before I could answer, my mother swooped in, her sixth sense for potentially awkward conversations finely tuned. "Hannah has a very stable administrative position," she said, steering my cousin away. "It's very quiet. Now have you seen the dessert spread? The chef has outdone himself." She shot me a look, a silent plea to play along, to not disrupt the carefully crafted narrative of the evening. "Don't make a scene. Don't embarrass us." I felt a familiar pang, not of anger, but of a deep, resonant loneliness. I was in a room full of people who shared my blood, yet I was utterly alone. They had created a version of me in their minds, quiet, unsuccessful, slightly pathetic Hannah, and they were so comfortable with it, they could no longer see the real person sitting right in front of them. The main event was yet to come, my father's speech. It was the moment he would officially anoint his son, and as was his tradition, subtly remind everyone of my own perceived failures. I took a slow sip of water, the cool liquid a stark contrast to the knot of apprehension tightening in my stomach. I could endure it. I had endured worse. I had stood on the bridge of a destroyer in a typhoon. I had briefed hostile admirals. I had held the lives of sailors in my hands. I could certainly endure my father's disapproval for one more night. I just had to get through the next 10 minutes. Finally, the moment arrived. My father, Wei Li, stood at the head of the table, tapping his glass for attention. A reverent hush fell over the room. His speeches were legendary in our social circle, eloquent, powerful, and always designed to reinforce his own status as a successful patriarch. "Friends, family, esteemed colleagues," he began, his voice booming with practiced confidence. "Tonight, we celebrate not just a promotion, but the future. We celebrate the continuation of a legacy." He placed a proud hand on David's shoulder. "My son David has shown the acumen, the drive, and the loyalty that this company, that this family is built upon. He has made me a very proud father." He launched into a glowing tribute, weaving a tale of David's supposed genius. He spoke of late nights at the office, of fierce negotiations, of a relentless commitment to the family name. The guests nodded and murmured their approval, caught up in the myth he was spinning. I watched, my face an impassive mask, recognizing the performance for what it was. My father wasn't just praising his son, he was praising himself, validating his own life's work through the success of his heir. After several minutes of effusive praise for David, he paused. His gaze swept the table, and for a brief, chilling moment it landed on me. He didn't mention my name. He didn't have to. "Success," he continued, his voice taking on a more somber, philosophical tone, "is not a frivolous thing. It is not about chasing childhood fantasies or running away from responsibility. It is about building something tangible, something real. It's about creating a legacy that will last for generations." The implication was as sharp and clear as a shard of glass. My life, my career, was a childhood fantasy. My service was running away from responsibility. He was talking directly to me, using the public stage to deliver a private condemnation. I saw a few guests glance my way with pitying looks before quickly looking away. They were all in on it. They all understood my role in this family play. Then came the final, brutal twist of the knife. He leaned over to the man sitting next to him, a major investor in his company, and lowered his voice into a stage whisper, a volume perfectly calibrated to be overheard by the entire table. He sighed, a sound of profound paternal disappointment. "It's a shame not all children understand this," he said, shaking his head sadly. "She'll never succeed," Dad said. "Not in the real world, anyway." A wave of uncomfortable, sycophantic laughter rippled through the guests. It was the sound of complicity, the sound of people affirming my father's judgment to curry his favor. They laughed at me, the quiet daughter, the family failure. The sound shed over me, a familiar tide of humiliation. My face remained a calm, placid lake, but beneath the surface, a silent storm raged. In that moment, the last thread of hope I had ever held for his approval finally snapped. I did not flinch. I did not look away. I held my father's gaze for a brief moment, my expression unreadable before dropping my eyes to the pristine white tablecloth. There was nothing to be said. His verdict had been delivered and publicly affirmed. My trial and sentencing were complete. I was a failure. The laughter died down, replaced by the self-satisfied murmur of conversation. My father, his duty done, sat down, basking in the glow of his own magnanimity. He had successfully celebrated his son and put his daughter in her place in a single, efficient speech. For him, the evening was a triumph. The waiter came to refill my water glass, his movements silent and discreet. I gave him a small nod of thanks. I felt strangely detached, as if I were observing the scene from a great height. The pain was there, a dull, familiar ache in my chest, but it was overlaid with a kind of weary resignation. This was who they were. This was who they would always be. And just as that thought settled in my mind, a sound cut through the clinking of silverware and the drone of conversation. It was not loud. It was a specific, powerful vibration, emanating from the small, nondescript black phone I had placed on the table beside my plate. It wasn't a musical ringtone or a novelty alert. It was a series of 3 short, sharp buzzes, a unique haptic pattern I had programmed myself. Priority 1 alert. My training, years of it, kicked in instantly. The humiliation, the family drama, the noise of the restaurant, it all faded into the background, replaced by a singular, razor-sharp focus. I glanced at the screen. The caller ID was blocked, as it always was. My heart rate didn't spike. My breathing remained steady. I was a calm center in a world that had suddenly, silently gone on high alert. My father noticed my attention shift. "Hannah," he said, his voice sharp with annoyance. "We are at a family dinner. Put that away." "Whatever it is, it can wait." "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "It can't." I stood up, my movements fluid and economical. "Excuse me," I said to the table at large. "I have to take this call." I saw a flash of fury in my father's eyes at my open defiance. My brother David smirked, shaking his head as if to say, "There she goes again, always so dramatic about her little job." I ignored them. I turned my back on the table and walked a few paces away, toward the quiet of a silk-paneled wall, seeking the bare minimum of privacy in this gilded cage. The phone buzzed again, insistent, demanding. I took a steadying breath and answered. I pressed the phone to my ear, my body angled away from the prying eyes of the banquet table. "Lee," I answered, my voice low and professional. It was the only identification needed. The voice on the other end was female, crisp, and devoid of any emotion or preamble. It was a voice I recognized, the night watch officer at the National Military Command Center. The line was encrypted, secure, but protocol dictated brevity. "Commander Lee, this is Nightfall," the voice stated, using the call sign for the NMCC's highest alert channel. "A situation has developed in the South China Sea. Your presence is required at the Pentagon immediately. Acknowledge." The words were delivered in a rapid, efficient stream. There was no room for questions, no space for discussion. "A situation has developed. Report immediately." It was the summons I had trained for, the call that every officer at my level both expects and dreads. It meant that somewhere in the world, the delicate balance had shifted. It meant that diplomacy was failing, and my specific expertise was now a critical asset. "Acknowledged," I replied, my own voice a mirror of the caller's calm professionalism. "ETA 30 minutes, Lee out." I ended the call. The entire exchange had taken less than 10 seconds. In that brief moment, my world had contracted from the petty drama of a family dinner to the immense, crushing weight of a potential international crisis. I stood for a second, my back still to the room, processing the information. South China Sea, my area of specialization. It was serious. I composed myself, my mind already racing, cycling through protocols, threat assessments, and contingency plans. The hurt from my father's words was gone, burned away by the hot rush of adrenaline and a profound sense of duty. I was no longer Hannah Lee, the disappointing daughter. I was Commander Lee of the United States Navy, and I had a job to do. I turned back to the table. The conversation had faltered, the guests watching me with a mixture of curiosity and annoyance at the interruption. My father's face was a thundercloud of disapproval. "I hope that was sufficiently important to disrupt your brother's celebration," he said, his voice aced with sarcasm. I met his gaze, and for the first time he wasn't looking at the daughter he thought he knew. He was looking at a stranger. The polite, accommodating mask I always wore in their presence had fallen away, replaced by an expression of focused, unshakable authority. My eyes were clear, my posture rigid, my entire being radiating an intensity he had never seen before. The room suddenly felt very small, the clinking of champagne glasses absurdly frivolous. The real world, in all its brutal, unforgiving reality, had just entered the room. "I have to leave," I said, my voice flat, devoid of apology. I walked back to my chair and retrieved my small clutch purse. "It's a work emergency." My father rose from his chair, his face flushing with anger at my blatant disregard for his authority. "A work emergency," he scoffed. "What kind of administrative emergency is so important that you must walk out on your family? You are being incredibly disrespectful, Hannah." My brother David leaned back in his chair, a wine glass held loosely in his hand, a smug grin on his face. "Let her go, Dad," he said, his words slightly slurred. "It's probably for the best. What's the big emergency, Hannah? Did a filing cabinet tip over somewhere?" The guests at the table tittered, enjoying the drama, the final act in the shaming of the errant daughter. I ignored them all. My focus was singular: get out of this room and get to the Pentagon. I pulled my light coat from the back of my chair. My movements were quick, efficient, and purposeful. I was already gone, my mind thousands of miles away on the deck of a carrier in a submerged submarine in the tense quiet of a command center. "I asked you a question," my father boomed, taking a step towards me. "You will not walk out of here. This is an important night for this family. You will sit down." "I can't," I said, meeting his furious gaze without blinking. "I have my orders." The words, so alien in this setting, hung in the air. Orders. It was a word from a different universe, a universe of hierarchy and duty that had no place amidst their world of profit margins and social climbing. And then, the moment that shattered their reality. David, who had been closest to me when I took the call, who had perhaps caught a single, contextless word, suddenly froze. The smug grin slid from his face. His eyes widened, the drunken haze vanishing, replaced by a look of dawning, horrified comprehension. "Commander." That was the word he must have heard. He replayed the one-sided conversation in his head, and the pieces began to click into place. The urgent tone, the professional brevity, the sudden transformation in his sister. He looked at me, truly looked at me, as if for the first time. The quiet, bookish girl he had always dismissed was gone. In her place stood a woman of terrifying composure and authority. The wine glass slipped from his fingers. He made a strange, choked sound, and a fine spray of expensive red wine erupted from his mouth as he spat it out across the pristine white tablecloth. The room went silent. The sound of my brother choking, and the sight of the dark red stain spreading across the white linen, was a shocking, visceral interruption to the evening's curated perfection. All eyes, which had been on my father and me, now swiveled to David. He was pale, his eyes wide with disbelief, staring at me as if I had just grown a second head. The laughter, the whispers, the clinking of glasses, it all ceased. A profound, ringing silence descended upon the room. The only sound was the faint hum of the restaurant's ventilation system. My father stared at his son, bewildered. "David, what is wrong with you?" But David didn't answer. He couldn't. He just kept staring at me, the single word he had overheard, commander, echoing in his mind, colliding with 20 years of carefully constructed assumptions about his failure of a sister. The guests looked back and forth between us, their faces a canvas of confusion. They knew something significant had just happened, but they had no idea what it was. The power dynamic in the room had fundamentally, irrevocably shifted, and the aftershocks were just beginning to register. I took advantage of the stunned silence. I had my duty. I had my orders. I gave a single brief nod that was meant for no one and everyone, a final, silent farewell. Then I turned and walked toward the exit. My steps were steady and swift on the polished floor. I did not run. I did not look back. I simply left. I walked out of the banquet hall, past the curious stares of the restaurant staff, and into the cool night air. The oppressive atmosphere of the dinner fell away, replaced by the cool clarity of my mission. As the door swung shut behind me, I imagined the scene I had left behind. A room full of stunned, silent people, a stain of red wine on a white tablecloth, and a lifetime of lies and misconceptions shattered in a single 10-second phone call. my family had wanted a show, a coronation for their golden son. Instead, they had gotten a revelation. They had spent the evening mocking a ghost, only to discover that the ghost was, in fact, a general in their midst. And she had just been summoned to a war they didn't even know was being fought. Back in the banquet hall, the silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Finally, my mother, Mei Ling, was the first to speak, her voice a frightened whisper. "David, Wei, what just happened?" Wei Li was still staring at the door through which I had disappeared, his face a mask of fury and confusion. "She made a scene," he growled, trying to reassert his authority. "She deliberately tried to ruin her brother's night, that is all." But his words lacked conviction. He knew it was more than that. He had seen the look in my eyes, had felt the absolute certainty in my departure. It was not defiance, it was duty. David finally found his voice. It was hoarse, unsteady. "The call," he stammered, wiping his mouth with a napkin. The way she answered, "Lee, just Lee," and the person on the phone, I heard them, they called her Commander. The word dropped into the silent room like a stone into a still pond. Commander, it was a title of respect, of authority. It did not fit the image of the meek, unsuccessful daughter they had all cultivated for so long. The investor sitting next to my father, a man who had laughed the loudest at his joke, now looked deeply uncomfortable. "Commander," he repeated, his brow furrowed. "As in, a military commander." Wei Li waved a dismissive hand, though his own uncertainty was palpable. "It's a job title, a middle manager, it means nothing." But the seed of doubt had been planted. The guests began to whisper amongst themselves, the mood of celebration utterly shattered. The story of David's promotion was forgotten, replaced by the far more compelling mystery of his sister. The carefully constructed facade of the Lee family had cracked, and everyone was peering through to see the truth underneath. The banquet ended abruptly and awkwardly not long after. My parents, desperate to escape the prying eyes and whispered questions, offered hurried apologies and fled. The triumph of the evening had turned to ash in their mouths. Their son's coronation had been utterly upstaged by his sister's spectral exit. They had intended to showcase their success, but had instead exposed their profound ignorance. The night was no longer about David, the heir apparent. It was about Hannah, the enigma. In the days that followed, a frantic, desperate search for answers began. My parents, who had never shown the slightest interest in the details of my career, were now consumed by it. My father, Wei, leveraged his extensive network of business contacts, making discreet but urgent inquiries. He called old university friends with connections in Washington, men he usually only contacted for business deals or political donations. "I'm trying to understand my daughter's role," he would say, his voice carefully neutral. "She has a position with the Department of Defense." The information that trickled back was fragmented, couched in vague, respectful terms, but it painted a picture that was utterly incomprehensible to him. They heard words like strategic analyst, geopolitical intelligence, and command staff. They learned that my rank was not that of a middle manager, but was equivalent to a senior corporate executive, a director responsible for vast and critical operations. A friend of his who ran a major logistics company that subcontracted with the military told him, "Wei, I can't tell you what she does, but I can tell you that people at the Pentagon speak of Commander Lee with a great deal of respect. You must be very proud." The words Commander Lee, respect, proud, were like a foreign language to my father. He had built his world on the tangible metrics of wealth and status. He understood profit and loss, assets and liabilities. He did not understand this world of quiet, immense power, of service that sought no public recognition, of success that couldn't be quantified on a balance sheet. My mother, meanwhile, experienced the fallout on the social front. The story of the dramatic dinner party had spread like wildfire through their circle. Her friends, who had once pitied her for having such a disappointing daughter, now buzzed with questions she couldn't answer. The face she had worked so hard to maintain was now a mask of confusion. The shame she had always feared had been replaced by a new, more unsettling emotion, a profound and public ignorance about her own child. They had spent a decade looking at me, but they had never once seen me. Now they were trying to piece me together from second-hand reports and respectful whispers, like archaeologists trying to build a dinosaur from a few scattered bones. The daughter they thought they knew had never really existed. The woman who did exist was a complete and utter stranger to them. The final, decisive blow to my father's worldview came not from a Washington insider, but from an old business rival, a man named Mr. Chen. Chen owned a competing trading company, and their relationship had always been one of sharp professional animosity, though they moved in the same social circles. One afternoon, my father ran into him at their private club. Chen, who had heard the rumors, approached him, a rare, unreadable expression on his face. "Wei," he said, dispensing with the usual pleasantries. "I heard a story about your daughter." My father braced himself for a gloating remark, a jab at his family's recent public drama, but Chen's next words stunned him into silence. "My nephew," Chen said, his voice low and serious, "is a lieutenant in the Navy. He served a tour at the Pentagon last year. He told me he once had to brief your daughter. He said it was the most terrifying and impressive experience of his life." My father could only stare. He said Commander Lee is one of the sharpest strategic minds they have, that she sees 10 moves ahead of everyone else. He said when she speaks, generals listen. Chen looked my father directly in the eye. "You and I compete in the world of money, Wei. We fight over shipping lanes and market shares. Your daughter, she fights on a much, much bigger board." He paused, then delivered the final, devastating line. "For all our rivalry, I have to say, you are a lucky man. Your legacy isn't in your company. It is in her." Mr. Chen nodded once, a gesture of newfound, grudging respect, and walked away. My father stood there, rooted to the spot, the sound of the squash court echoing in the distance. The words from his rival, a man he had spent his life trying to best, had hit him with the force of a physical blow. Generals, listen. Her legacy is in her. Everything he believed about success, about family, about his own life's work, had just been turned upside down. He had spent years boasting about his son, the prince, while he had been utterly blind to the fact that his daughter was the queen. The failure wasn't mine. It was his. And the shame of that realization was a weight far heavier than any he had ever known. Months passed. I was on a long-term assignment overseas, stationed at a joint command base in the Pacific. My days were a blur of classified briefings, strategic planning sessions, and immense pressure. The world was a complex, volatile place, and my work was to find the patterns in the chaos, to chart a safe course through the storm. I was good at my job. I was respected. I had a purpose. The drama of that family dinner felt like something from another lifetime, a scene from a movie about someone else. The emotional wounds, which had once been so raw, had scarred over, leaving behind a kind of numb, detached sadness. I had moved on. One evening, I returned to my quarters after a grueling 16-hour shift. I was exhausted, my mind still buzzing with satellite imagery and intelligence reports. I opened my laptop to check my personal email, a rare indulgence. Tucked among the junk mail and newsletters was a message with a familiar name in the subject line. From Wei Li, my father. He had never emailed me before in his life. Our communication was limited to stilted, obligatory phone calls on holidays. My first instinct was to delete it, to leave the past in the past. But curiosity, a stubborn, vestigial remnant of the daughter I used to be, made me click it open. The email was short, the sentences clumsy and uncharacteristically hesitant. He wrote that he had been learning more about my work. He said he had spoken to some people. He did not apologize. The word sorry was not in his vocabulary, but between the lines, I could read the struggle of a proud, stubborn man trying to articulate a feeling he had never experienced before, a bewildering sense of awe for his own child. The final line of the email read, "We are having a banquet for the new year. We would be honored if you could attend." Honored. He had never used that word with me before. It was a concession, an offering, a white flag from a king who had finally realized he was not the most powerful person in the kingdom. I read the email twice. I thought of the years of dismissal, the casual cruelty, the public humiliation. I thought of the profound, unbridgeable chasm between his world and mine. An invitation could not fix what was so fundamentally broken. I closed the laptop. I did not reply. My world was one of clear, decisive action. There was no room for ambiguity, no time for relationships that were a constant, draining negotiation. He had called me a failure, and a voice from the Pentagon had corrected him. The record was straight. My honor was intact, but my family was a casualty of a war I hadn't even known I was fighting, and some casualties can never be recovered.